Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another show. How are you all doing? I am going to be doing a little bit of a flashback episode. Not really all that much of a spoiler, given that that's not right in the title. So this was something that the real John Wick had asked about in a stream quite a while ago, and I don't know if this was back right before I got the flu slash COVID slash the flu again. But whatever it was that knocked me out for the better part of a month. Think I'm pretty sure I said I was going to do it, and then I kind of got away from me. And now I'm coming back around to it for a couple of reasons. One, I've been missing Darth Dawkins. Content from him has been a little shallow lately, and it sounds like he might have some things going on. So hopefully it's nothing too bad. I don't wish him any actual, evil in his life. It sounded like the praise I am a couple of nights ago. It sounded like he had a conversation with Darth briefly at some point, like in passing on Clubhouse, and maybe there's some kind of family thing going on with Double D. Um, so hopefully that's nothing too serious. But he's, I think he's still on there. Someone I know, Alistair, who might be here in the chat, if not now, maybe later, had a conversation with him earlier, so I don't know if he's back or whatever. But anyway, I don't know that a lot of people really caught any recent conversations with him with anybody either on Clubhouse or on Discord. I think he's been a little preoccupied. So that's good. This gives me an opportunity to kind of went back in time a little more than a year ago, and this is from 3 years ago to take a look at this conversation, and it's relatively cordial. I mean, again, this for Darth, he still gets impatient, raises his voice, uses his outdoor voice way too much. Um, but it seems like John Wick kind of keeps him. Like John Wick does not trigger Darth Dawkins, funnily enough. So yeah, they have a conversation, but and what kind of piqued my interest about this one, I had kind of avoided this one because well, not really because of the length. I had listened to the last half of this, and it seemed like it was fairly cordial, and it went over some normal stuff, and nothing really kind of piqued my interest. Going back and watching it again from the very beginning and watching it the whole way through, there's some points that Darth brings up here that I don't hear very often anymore, but they might actually be the origin for some of the things that Jay Robbins says. So they might be worth talking about here. So that's what I'm going to do. Thanks everybody for showing up. One other brief bit of news: I am monetized, weaponized by the YouTube Partner Program, and all of its glory. And super chats are working, as people have already done. Pinworm, I appreciate this one, especially because it's got something in there to get me banned or something. Sofa King, awesome! You're getting paid. Thank you very much, Pinworm. And Antipode Cereal, we super chat. Thank you very much. Yeah, first time dealing with monetization. I've never been monetized with any channel before, so I'm in new territory here. Hopefully, this is a decent experience for you guys. And hopefully the ads aren't too annoying. Most of my stuff, my previous stuff, anything that's been public, I think has been monetized. I don't know what the ad situation looks like when I went through, and you get to go through and do all that kind of stuff. You pick and choose what you want monetized. I didn't monetize everything because I thought that was a little bit nuts. But what I did monetize as I was doing it, it came back as limited advertising appeal. Like, yeah, shocker. I talk about precepts getting obnoxious on the internet. I don't imagine Charmin wants to advertise with me. So much for that dream of that big atheism money I kept hearing about. But oh well. So but yeah, no, this is fun. So I'm gonna keep doing what I normally do, and hopefully, regardless of whatever income this thing generates, probably this will go to either like buying equipment or charity or something like that. Maybe I can actually improve the production value of my little hobby. Or given my lack of technical efficiency, I will probably continue to use StreamYard because it's easy to do this with a laptop. And I'm less likely to start a fire or strangle myself with a power cord. So anyway, um, oh, spooky! Read my super chat message that I wanted to post. Oh, okay. Oh, yes, I will. Let's see. He wanted me to read this, and he posted, I think a pound or 2 pounds. Imagine an imaginary menagerie manager managing an imaginary menagerie. Thanks for the warm up. Um, Thank you for that, Spooky Bed Hair. And I hope I didn't get the amount that you gave me. But it was my first super chat, so extra thanks to Spooky. And it was in pounds, which is extra cool. Thank you, Sickfest. What? I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yes, thank you, Alpha. Congrats on 1,000 subs. Thank you, Alpha. All right, so with that done and said, that's pretty much it. So everything else is going to go on just as it did before. I'm supposed to tell you that I can't highlight all your comments anymore unless you pay me. Sorry, bad joke. Continue as you will. Hey, Red Fang, what's up? Glad to have it here. All right, so let's get this one started. And same rules apply. If playback is going weird, sound is weird, just yell at me in the live chat. We'll get this one started. Here we go.
I think
you're changing the subject.
You're talking over me.
I'm talking over you because you're changing.
You just agreed
you're changing the subject.
So you just agreed not to overtalk me and interrupt
me.
And now you're doing it again.
I've had to interject as a moderator because you're changing the subject.
Your claim that God...
Remember, this one is relatively cordial. Like there's a moment in this where he praises JohnWick for being nice or not being an a-hole or something like that, right? And then towards the end, it almost turns into like this mutual admiration society between the two of them. It's really weird. But there is that brief bit that Tom Rabbit, he's such a divisive character. These atheists, they're out for that. Always out looking for the faults in people. But no, Darth doesn't get as triggered. I think I probably should have mentioned he doesn't get as triggered with JohnWick, but he does a little bit. But they, he maintains this conversation for the better part of an hour. So that's saying something for him.
God is the source of everything. That there is a impersonal or personal source of everything is a presupposition. It's a claim that cannot be falsified. It's a claim that can't be demonstrated. We can't prove it because we're limited by.
You're making another mistake that you're not even aware of.
Okay. Can you tell me what my mistake is? I'd like to be aware of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're using an atheistic agnostic style of reasoning that seeks to nullify any presentation of God by invoking the falsification criterion. Okay.
Okay,
are you familiar with the falsification criterion?
The falsification. Well, yeah, I'm very aware of how falsification works. It's science is a subset of philosophy.
We're not talking about science right now. But the point is simple.
So this is where things I thought got interesting. I'm gonna have to rewind this a little bit because I can't remember. Like, how did that start? Because that was pretty quick.
Style of reasoning.
Can you tell me what my mistake is? I'd like to be. Because we're limited by.
You're making another mistake that you're not even aware of.
Okay. Can you tell me what my mistake is? I'd like to be aware of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're using an atheistic agnostic
of everything.
Because you're changing the subject.
Okay, here it is.
Your claim that God is the source of everything. That there is a impersonal or personal source of everything is a presupposition. It's a claim that cannot be falsified. It's a claim that can't be demonstrated. We can't prove it because we're limited by.
You're making another mistake that you're not even aware of.
Okay. Can you tell me what my mistake is? I'd like to be aware of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're using an atheistic agnostic style of reasoning that seeks to nullify any presentation of God by invoking the falsification criterion.
I don't know exactly if that reaches that, right? Because I mean, for what I think JohnWick is talking about here in this one, the idea of invoking, because at some point in this conversation, it sounds like Darth gave him the usual thing that he's still giving people, right? It's either whatever you believe in is going to be whatever absolute you believe in is either personal or impersonal, right? It doesn't occur to him that you don't believe in an absolute. He's actually gotten quite a bit sloppier about this, where he just asserts that for the person. whatever absolute you believe in is either this or that, because he thinks that if you presuppose things like either the laws of logic or presuppose something axiomatically, that has to be grounded in an absolute. So therefore you believe in an absolute. It's just that your absolute isn't personal, and therefore it's a less complete ultimate thing to presuppose than what he presupposes, and therefore he wins. I think I'm getting that right. Anyway, in this case, though, he seems to think that this is a way of sort of like shifting things over into a falsification thing, where this is atheistic agnostic reasoning, in which you're going to bring up this criterion of falsification. Asks him what he knows, and he's going to get back into that, and then I think he actually says this isn't about science. I think is what's coming up.
Okay,
are you familiar with the are you familiar with the falsification criterion?
The falsification. Well, yeah, I'm very aware of how falsification works. It's science is a subset of philosophy.
We're not talking about science right now. But the point is simply this: is how would you?
Right. Then why did you bring up the we're not talking about science? No, instead we're talking about the criterion of falsification, which is part of the philosophy of science. That term is actually from Karl Popper, and so he brings this up, and well, we're not talking about science, but now I think he's going to try to like kind of condescend here a little bit, and try to explain what he thinks about the criterion of falsification. Again, I'm not exactly sure why he gets into this, but when I heard this, I was listening to this a couple days ago again when I went through it, start to finish, and I was just kind of shaking my head at this because I thought this was a really shaky start for him.
How would you falsify something if you don't have any absolute?
How would you falsify something if you don't have any absolute?
Tell me how you would falsify something without any absolute.
Well, see, I think this is...
So he invokes the the criterion of falsification, right? And then asks him, how do you falsify something without an absolute? One doesn't have anything to do with the other. Like, I'm kind of wondering about this. This actually brought up something that I found years ago. When I first got exposed to the presup argument, it was used on me in a debate with someone live. I didn't run across it on the internet. Someone did this, right? And when I heard the argument, they started using a lot of these kinds of catchphrases and stuff. And when I started hearing them, this particular person had picked them up off the internet, and just decided to trot them out, try to use them on me. So I was, after having a conversation, and a frustrating one, I remembered the phrases and went and started Googling them, and I started running into this presuppositional apologetic. And I just dug deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole as much as I could. And when I later confronted that person, said, well, you gave me a presuppositional apologetic, and his eyes went wide, because I don't think he thought that I would dig into it and then try to figure out what it was. And I'm like, I think that you knew about this and then used it on me as if this is something original, but you didn't actually attribute this to something that someone's presented before. And he's like, no, you're right. And he apologized for it. However, when I dug into this, one of the things that I found were, this was probably right around the time that Google Hangouts was getting popular. Not when I looked into this. I think Google Hangouts had kind of hit its zenith and was probably decreasing in popularity by the time I showed up. But some of the stuff that had happened during its rise on different chats and different message boards and things like that, there were discussions with people, especially presuppers, and some of the people that were having some really long arguments were people that were bringing up things like this. Criterion of falsification, pretty much anything from Karl Popper was used to kind of throw a wrench into the works. And one of those conversations was from someone named Evolution Faults, I think was the name at the time. And I didn't realize it until later on that it was this annoying older guy that was also on YouTube and in these other conversations. But I remember this. So I think he knows about this because he's probably had to look up a little bit about Karl Popper because of old arguments that were presented to him before. But for some strange reason, he doesn't seem to understand. He doesn't seem to have any appreciation for what he's talking about, because the criterion of falsification has nothing to do with an ultimate. You would actually, the criterion of falsification would be something like, summed up as quickly as I can, it'd be something like the standard for science in which it's Karl Popper's idea of categorizing something as scientific. It only hits that category of scientific if it can be disproved, right? These ideas where you can just make multiple positive observations about something over and over and over again, and that's somehow scientific. Popper didn't think that that was a great thing, because it wouldn't matter if you had, 1,000, 100,000, a million, observations in support of something. One observation to the contrary would throw the whole thing out of whack, would completely disprove it. And so anything that was left open to that kind of disproof, that was something that was kind of scientific. And given the time period, I think that he was doing that, that was when he had different people presenting all sorts of things as sort of scientific. Like one of them was like Karl Marx kind of had like a theory, a supposedly scientific theory of history, which Popper philosophically, for his philosophy of science, and because of this criterion of falsification, he didn't consider that hit that didn't meet that. It didn't meet that criterion. It didn't match that, so it was not something he would consider scientific. He would consider something like Einstein's general theories of theory of relativity. That would count. So anyway, so the idea behind this is pretty simple. Like you could have a scientific theory or a hypothesis, an inductive hypothesis about all swans being white. One observation of a black swan throws that right out of whack, right? That's one of the reasons why it can be disproved, and that criterion of falsification is extremely valuable. But for some reason here, Darth seems to be saying, well, how do you falsify something if you don't have an absolute? I don't understand why that would matter, because falsification would happen within the relationship between the thing being described, or a theory, and then an observation or something that contradicts it. So why that's dependent on an absolute, who knows? I've been talking way too long. I will keep doing this, and I'm going to go back through here and read some chats.
It's a problem with your argument in general, is that your argument.
Listen,
no, wait. I've been very
on my question. Here's the question: how is falsifiability even intelligible without there being any absolute?
So
how would you falsify something without any appeal that anything is absolute?
So I'm going to answer your question, but I want to say just a really quick thing before I do. I have done my very best to be polite and not interrupt you and not talk.
You are.
But
and thank you, John Papiano, for the super chat. Save this for your birthday, Jefferson. I'm buying you a bottle of wine for hitting 10,000 subs. Thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. We'll see after the YouTube tax man takes their pick. I'll probably be able to afford a can of wine. But no, greatly appreciate it. Thanks for showing up. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
But I don't feel that you're giving me the same consideration, because whenever I'll
try to be better then. Go ahead.
The best wine is good tasting cheap wine. That's the challenge. Any idiot can buy a $500 bottle of wine and say it's the best wine ever. Of course, they have to say that. They just spent $500 on a bottle of wine. But $5 wine that's delicious, that's a treasure. Thank you again, John.
I appreciate that, and I thank you for saying that. All right, so I think that the main problem with your argument, which I actually want to help you with, because I think that the main problem with your argument is that we do not agree on base knowledge, on presuppositions. We just don't agree on them. My presuppositions are that I can trust my senses to a degree that I can survive.
I'm not even. Listen, sir. Listen to me. We're not even discussing that issue right now.
Well, I think
you're changing the subject.
I think
you're changing the subject.
You're talking over me.
I'm talking over you because you're changing.
You just agreed
you're changing the subject.
I'm not exactly sure where this accusation is coming from, because the whole question was, how do you do this without an absolute? And I think that JohnWick is trying to, and I think he's still here in the live chat. Correct me if I'm wrong here, JohnWick, but it sounds like to me like if you have this reasonable expectation of reliability of your senses, then you can, that's enough to be able to pursue these claims and pursue things like falsification. I don't see how you haven't been anything other than patient with Darth at this point. And the fact that he's already getting frustrated, oh, you're changing the subject. For him, it's the fact that I think he thinks that you're changing the subject because you don't want to acknowledge what he's insisting on, that, and that is they have a special relationship with the truth because they have a relationship with truth itself, which is God. And so they can assert things in a way that can be certain, but you and I are still muddying around in those weird waters. You know, we just, well, maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. But this is the part of the precept thing that I thought a lot of these guys had shed. And it's weird to go back even 3 years and hear Darth still acting. Darth still is doing this now. 3 years later, he's still talking like this, where it's still pretty apparent that he's internalized the precept argument as in, we have certainty as Christians, and we have every right to say that we do. You don't. Which is weird, because anytime somebody has asked them, like, well, it sounds like it's not a difference between Christians and everybody else. It sounds like it's just a difference between believers and everybody else. Because a Hindu or a Muslim or a Jew, or, you know, a variety of other religious traditions with deities or spirits or something like that, probably make similar claims to certainty of truth. Hopefully they wouldn't, but they could. Maybe they can on the same grounds. They have a relationship with the being. They have some kind of special revealed truth, a secret knowledge. Even the Gnostics believe that. It's sort of the basis of the entire thing. So yeah, Darth is just kind of, he's being Darth.
So you just agreed not to overtalk me and interrupt
me,
and now you're doing it again.
I've had to interject as a moderator because you're changing the subject.
Okay, please ask me your question. I can answer it the best I can, because I've lost it. I'm sorry.
You reject the notion that intelligibility, for propositions and predications, does not require that anything is absolute. Is that you correct?
I need to rephrase that so it's a little bit more correct than what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's impossible for us to know with 100% certainty that anything that we do, perceive or act, is in accordance to what we perceive. I think it's impossible to know.
I'm not. Listen. Now, what you're doing now is you're bringing in an epistemic issue, which we haven't even gotten to that yet. Okay. Well,
so he wants to talk about the criterion of falsification, and somehow they have not been talking about epistemology or epistemological issues. That's weird. That's I was really glad about this part, because he brings that up and then he just starts stepping all over it. And I think there's a part like later, about 15 minutes in, where he really steps in it. But
what we're talking about is ontology.
Super chat from Maya Atkinson, $10. Thank you. Congrats on monetization, Jeff. It's long overdue. Yeah, thank you. I don't know about the overdue part, but you're nice to say that. And thank you, because you're almost always here. You've always been supportive. Thank you. There would not be a channel without you, and without supporters like you guys. So I always have a great audience here. As long as a Tangelo and that idiot Dark Ninja don't show up, then everything's fine. Although you guys really deserve a Felix Rodriguez tonight. If Felix Rodriguez is out there, is that his last name? It's Felix something. I hope he shows up. Gives you guys something to do. Thank you again, Maya.
Not an epistemic question. We will get to that. Right now, what we're talking about is does intelligibility require, meaning the meaning of something, require a certain ontological status? Okay, that there's something either personal absolute or an impersonal absolute.
So when you say
how we come to know that it means something is something else. But what we're saying is something means something in virtue of its dependency ontologically.
I understand.
But that's just a way of restating it. You can't know something unless it's based on something actually real. And if it's not actually real, then you couldn't know it. But this always kind of begs that question. So the only things that you can know are things that actually exist. You can't actually know things that don't actually exist. Can you know about stories and stuff? Like, I mean, I don't want to get into that because it's like, that's kind of simple. Like it automatically rises to those kinds of questions, like what is truth and what are truths and what's a fact versus what's not a fact, all that kind of stuff. But this is just kind of odd because he is right here he's not making a connection between ontology and epistemology. He's making them the same damn thing. And he's too lazy to realize it. And this idea of like falsification that he's kind of bringing up doesn't make any sense, because the falsification criteria should be something that he should be all about, because something is either real or it's not, right? And you want to know for certain, right? Or as close to certain as you can. So again, this raises the whole thing. Like I'm not even sure why he brought that up. I mean, he brought it up as if like, oh, this is your way of kind of inserting your your atheistic logic onto things. Like, okay. And then wants to like debunk the falsification criterion of falsification, because maybe Karl Popper didn't have an absolute when he came up with the idea, like completely dismissing the idea that the reason that Karl Popper came up with that kind of idea was about classifying something as scientific versus other pursuits, right? And for some strange reason, I'm not exactly sure what Darth's issue is with it, other than to say that he thought that's what JohnWick brought up, and JohnWick was wrong to do that. And now JohnWick is wrong because he's not going to connect stuff that he claims to know or not know with things that actually exist, I think. So we're kind of seeing Darth, like, I think Darth has like sped things up like this. This is still, like I said, this is 3 years ago. So this was what he's been doing this for 10 years. So he was in year 7 at this point or something, roughly. Maybe he was still taking things, he was going through, guiding people through more steps at a time, not cutting so many corners.
Good. Now, does ultimate intelligibility require that there be something, either does intelligibility at all for any assertion or proposition require that there be something that is unconditionally non-dependent?
Can reality itself be unconditionally non-dependent?
Did you need me to repeat the question?
No. I'm asking a legitimate question, because if I say yes, I can say that
okay.
I am trying to answer your question.
Can you have intelligibility without there being anything unconditionally non-dependent?
I don't know.
Yeah, and that really doesn't make any sense, because the fact that it's intelligible one way or the other doesn't necessarily have anything to do with whether or not there's something ultimately undergirding it, right? Like, and I kind of wonder about this when it comes to things like fiction for Darth, right? Like, a fictional story depends on a mind, but you wouldn't say that it's connected to an ontological thing. It's not dependent on a physical thing. It's communicated in some way. Now, I might be inclined to do that as somebody who's closer to, like, being a little bit cozier with physicalism or materialism or something like that, where I believe that thought is a physical process. In fact, based on what cognitive science is showing us, it sounds like that's exactly what it is. So thoughts and things like that, they're grounded in us. But for whatever reason, Darth doesn't think that any of that kind of stuff is even. This is the thing I have an issue with. He doesn't even think that stuff is even tentatively okay. The idea that you could, like, if you do the whole ducks thing, or the swans thing, all swans are white, and then you see a black swan in Australia or Japan, and now it's blown that theory out of the water. Nope, turns out not all swans are white. All right. Do you need God to be able to figure that out? Darth thinks you do. And I'm just not seeing that, because if the capacity to make those kinds of determinations in the world that we live in, which Darth believes he made, then the autonomy and the reason that he gave us to be able to figure things out like that is also part of something that he made for us. To say that it's not possible without him is the same as saying that, well, without God, we'd just be dead. So he's still doing that same thing. Well, if there were no God, you wouldn't be able to figure out anything. No, if there were no God, there wouldn't be anything. So that doesn't make any sense. I'm going to continue to say that until he blocks me. But he's blocked me on every medium that we share in access to, I think.
No.
Okay, that's the problem. Okay, because that's the.
Do you know? Do you know?
Do I know what?
Do you know that it requires an ultimate? Do you know what I don't know?
Yes.
Okay, how do you know that?
God revealed it.
God revealed it to you. Okay.
Actually, he doesn't. This is interesting. He does not know. He's violating his theology.
Yes.
Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions about God?
Yes, he
yeah,
does.
but when we finish,
I mean, God? No.
Oh,
That
here,
it requires an ultimate. Do you know what I don't know?
yes.
Okay, how do you know that?
Do you know what I don't know? And he said, yes. No. That's not possible. And Darth knows better. And he should have known better. I'd be interested if somebody asked him this question now, if he'd get this wrong again. All men know God, but deny the truth in their unrighteousness. That's special revelation. So why is he telling this guy that he doesn't know it? He has to know it according to Darth's worldview. Darth is fucking up his basic, the basic kind of thing here that he's had for 10 years plus. We all know God, but we're liars. It's something that people have tried to get him to just admit to. It explains a lot of his anger and his rage, because I think he actually does believe that, and he really has internalized it. And here he is telling JohnWick, "Oh, no, I know something that you don't. I know God, and you don't." Wrong, Darth. It's impossible from your worldview for JohnWick to not know your God. That is impossible. That is denying the revelation of your God, and that is blasphemy.
God revealed it.
God revealed it to you. Okay.
Yes.
Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions about God?
Yeah.
And see, he followed it up. He doubled down. He knows something that he doesn't. How is it? How is that the case? God revealed it to me. God revealed it to us all, Darth. He revealed it to all of us, not just to the people who are saved. JohnWick is just denying the truth in his unrighteousness. So, I don't know. It sounds like Darth is blaspheming the Holy Spirit. He's calling into question its power and its existence. That's the unforgivable sin.
Yeah, but when we finish the topic about
the, I'm sorry. You've
Sir,
asked me
listen,
a lot of questions.
The problem is in the conversation is you're not focusing. We haven't resolved the issue about why a lack of belief necessarily constitutes positionally the negation of the existence of God. We haven't resolved that yet.
Well, I think that this line of questioning avoids the.
But why would that matter now? I mean, at this point, Darth has just admitted that his God reveals things to some people and not to others. So the conversation's over. Darth loses. I know what I know because I can only know what God reveals to me, and God has not revealed himself to me. Darth knows that, and Darth claims it's because it was revealed to him. But he knows it in a way that JohnWick doesn't. He admitted to that. So okay. So what do you do with that? God's revealing different things to different people. Wait, that doesn't make sense. That can't be the case, right? Because that's not what Paul says. And that's not how revelation works. It's been revealed to us all. That's how it has to be. That's the reason, from a precept perspective, that JohnWick has the ability to invoke things like a criterion of falsification, or ask these questions, or carry on an intelligible conversation with a Christian, quote unquote Christian, like Darth Dawkins, because of that revelation. So for Darth to say, "Oh no, yeah," at this point, we're like, as far as I'm like, now JohnWick is much more charitable and doesn't do this. He doesn't take it down that direction. But I would have kicked him right in his Bible here, Darth, not JohnWick. Been like, no, man, no. But that also would have turned my conversation into a 30-second one rather than a 44-minute one. So I think, for what it's worth, JohnWick probably had a better technique here.
Real question, which is, how do we know that God really exists?
Okay, sir. The problem in the conversation is not because you're stupid. You're not a stupid person. You have a great demeanor, and I appreciate that, because usually we get real jerks in here.
Thank you for
I think it's interesting that he has to start off with like kind of contradicting a negative, you know, like he can't just say, you know, I appreciate the fact that you've been polite and, you know, and that kind of thing. He has to like, you know, it's not, well, I just want to say that you're not, I don't think you're stupid. Like, it's interesting that Darth will usually he'll feign surprise when somebody attributes bad motives to him, but he sort of leads into it himself. Like he knows that his tone gives off this impression that he's talking down to somebody and treating them like a moron. So he leads with that. Like, I don't think you're dumb. I don't think you're an idiot. Like, okay, I didn't think that you did. I think you just sound like a jerk most of the time. So thanks for leading with that. But you know, from Darth, it's the best you can get, I guess. And before I forget, Alpha K91, thank you for your content. You're very welcome. Thanks for watching it. I'm glad you enjoy it. I'm glad there are people that do enjoy it. Appreciate the super chat. Let's see here. He doesn't think you're stupid yet because he hasn't got through his questions. Yeah, that's a good point, Shatterhouse. Very good point. Okay, here we go.
for the compliment.
Yeah. I mean, I'm delighted that we're having a couple of atheists come into the server who aren't complete jerks. I mean, they're not jerks. Okay. Right?
I'm trying my best not to, and I apologize.
I think you are. The only people I get angry with are people who just engage in lying and are trolling, and you're not doing either, right?
So I'm glad this is 3 years ago because I can forgive JohnWick because he's getting along way too well with Darth Dawkins here. Sorry, John.
I think the problem we're having here is you're segueing onto semi-related rabbit trails. And you're not focusing on the issue that we haven't resolved yet. Is that does the lack of belief in terms of a worldview analysis necessitate the falsity of the existence of God?
Perhaps if I steel man your argument, are you familiar with steel manning?
Yeah, well, I don't think you even understand it, so I think it would be a waste of time for you to steel man it. Now,
if I steel man you, it demonstrates that I understand.
Listen.
Right?
Okay. Do you agree? I want you to step in
to
a world where there's a personal absolute creator God.
Okay.
I want you to step into that world.
Sure.
Now, hold on 1 second.
Is he asking JohnWick to entertain a worldview other than his own? That sounds like worldview body doubleism going on there.
Plug in my keyboard.
Sure. I think that for the sake of the argument and for the sake of being charitable, of having a charitable discussion, I want to agree with you for the purposes of this argument that in order for me to know anything, that there has to be a independent, universal, and I'm sorry if I get some of the little language wrong, an independent universal source that provides all the things that I need in order to survive in the universe. I'm going to give
you two propositions. Okay.
Sure.
In a world where a personal creator God exists, all facts depend upon that personal absolute creator God. In a world,
I agree with you.
Okay. All right. Good. Now, in a world where a personal creator God does not exist, then all facts do not depend upon that God.
That's right. I agree.
Good. Now we're making progress. Now.
Awesome. I'm glad we're making progress.
When somebody says, I lack belief in God.
This might be the beginning of JohnWick's mistakes because he's enjoying himself. You could actually hear, I think you could hear a little bit of regret. Tinge Darth Dawkins' voice there a little bit like, this one's not scared.
Okay. They're claiming more than just a lack of belief. They're claiming that they have an apprehension of what was that? Did anybody else hear that?
I didn't hear anything. No.
Sound like some kind of epic music intro that was cut short.
I didn't hear either.
I heard so it sounded like some computer noise.
The easiest thing to do is just blame tone.
All right.
Because notice Tone didn't pipe up. He'd been in here before. Yeah, but I think it was Tone.
So when soft atheists say, I lack belief in God, but I am not, my position does not deny the existence of God, right? I have to point out to them that the very stipulation that they lack belief in God necessarily entails the denial. And the reason why is this, is if you lack belief in God, you're stipulating that you have possession of a fact, and your apprehension of that fact does not need God to be referenced. Okay?
The stipulation of that fact does not need to be referenced.
So he thinks that because it's a fact, I don't believe in a God, that ontologically that God can't exist. That's essentially what he's saying, because otherwise it would be, which is, I mean, par for the course. I don't know that I've heard this many times, but I thought this was kind of interesting the way he was kind of laying this out for JohnWick here, because you had two worlds, one where there's a God, so all facts are contingent upon him. Then you got a world where no facts are contingent upon him. So basically, he's just trying to set this up so that no one can be agnostic. The problem with this agnostic, him, because I think this was back when, I don't know if he had started around this time or if he'd been up to this for a while, where he just wanted to eliminate the agnostic position altogether because it's basically impenetrable for him. And so by laying this one out, like, okay, well, here's the problem. There's either a world where there's a God where all facts are dependent upon it. There's this other world where there is no God. So there, obviously any facts in that world aren't dependent on it. And you got somebody who says they don't believe in a God. So I'm trying to figure out why that's a contradiction from the worldview where those facts don't depend on a God, right? And he seems to think like, well, no, it has to be one or the other. Therefore, you can kind of get there from the person's epistemology. The fact of their belief is grounded in either the existence or non-existence of that being, and therefore that means they can't be an agnostic. They're either an affirmer or a denier of the being. But that's conflating two facts: what they think they know with what can be known.
Yeah, in order to apprehend that fact, to be in possession of that fact, God does not need to be referenced as the origin point.
Okay? To say that I don't know if God exists?
If you say, I lack belief in God, there's more to that statement than meets the eye. It's what the statement entails. The statement entails that the person possesses knowledge of the fact that they lack belief.
Yes, that I know my
right now. Right. So now the person is saying, I am in possession of a fact, and that fact is known and is intelligible without reference to God.
So let me rephrase that. By saying I don't know if there's a God, I am referencing the fact that I know my own mind.
No, the statement I lack belief in God. Okay. When we make assertions, okay, sometimes those assertions contain more premises than meets the eye.
I completely agree.
This is where he likes to say, like, well, when you say that you don't believe in God, you had to assert, you have to, implicit in that is the denial of God, which is talking about the existence of God, which it's exhausting talking to these guys because it makes it sound like, well, if you can invoke a fact, then that thing must be real, which is just odd to me, because you could do this with almost anything. Now, when people ask about this and other things, with other things not proven, I believe the go-to response is that it's a category error because it's not a creator, right? Like if somebody were like, well, what if somebody was making a claim about Bigfoot or an actual unicorn? Somebody saw a white horse in the woods and it looked like it had a horn. and they'll be damned if that's not a unicorn, right? Well, that doesn't matter because those are contingent things. Those just be creatures running around in the world. But this thing in the category of God, that gets special attention. So, this entire time I forgot to embiggen the screen. My apology, folks. So I gotta quit using that word embiggen. I love it so much, though. It's so corny.
Right. So when I say I lack belief in God, I'm predicating a knowledge claim.
Yeah.
That I possess the fact that I don't know or I lack belief in God.
No, you're just talking about your psychological state. I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to do with, and that doesn't necessarily reflect reality. Right. I mean, it reflects the reality of your psychological state, but it's not necessarily. I mean, how does Darth Dawkins describe? How does he deal with the? Well, he probably doesn't understand the concept of like depression. Someone who is sad for no real reason. Somebody. It wasn't that somebody got angry with them or something bad happened to them, and therefore their reaction is they feel sad, but they're just having the emotional reaction of feeling sad, and it doesn't seem to have any source. So, well, hang on. No, sorry, that's getting too much into psychology. I bet Darth Dawkins would say it's demons.
So when I say I lack the belief in God, I am saying
I lack belief in God. I am in possession of a singular fact. Now, at this point, it no longer matters what the content of the fact is. What matters is that the person claims to be in possession of a fact without reference to God.
The consequence of that is saying that people don't know what they know.
No, sir.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood.
Either a fact is apprehended in reference to God, or a fact is not apprehended in reference to God. There's no middle ground.
So I can't.
Either God.
I like that because it doesn't change anything, right, for anybody. Like, let's say let's say that it's the case that either God exists or doesn't exist. What does that have to do with the reality of a person's psychological state? The idea that a person isn't convinced that there's a God is consistent with special revelation. A person who is suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. Darth believes that. Not all Christians would interpret it that way, but the way that I've heard Darth Dawkins talk about suppression of truth and unrighteousness is kind of consistent with that notion. Now, you know that there's a God, and you know it's the Christian God. All men know it's been revealed to all, but you suppress the truth, sir, in unrighteousness, or madam. So okay, but. So that would explain it. I don't. This isn't helpful for anybody because this seems to be like I really do think that Darth thinks that he's found a way around the noetic effect of sin. Like he thinks that he's doing the Holy Spirit's work here for it, right? The Holy Spirit has to regenerate a person's heart in order to get them past that particular thing, to get them to want to. Well, it depends on which way you believe that. Either to want to repent or to believe that your repentance is truly heartfelt or whatever, right? But there's some kind of regeneration. There's a work of grace happening. Most Christians adhere to that with some adjustments here and there. It's on a spectrum. That being said, this seems to be like, no. I can get you there just through pure rationalization. Let me walk. And he can't. The only way he can do that is with this weird little exercise here that actually in at least two ways now I think that I've described, well, at least one primary way, seems to be kind of violating his own theology. So it doesn't seem to be out of place for somebody to say, no, I don't believe that's my psychological disposition. That psychological disposition from his theological perspective is explained by sin.
God is the necessary precondition for the apprehension of all facts. Or God is not necessary for the precondition for facts.
That's because God is independent and the source of all facts, right?
Listen, either God is the necessary.
I like that when every time JohnWick tells him something, like to kind of make sure like Darth hasn't seemed to have clued in that the reason that he's doing this is to let Darth know that he's following along at a pace, and he wants to make sure that he's got it right up to this point, so that Darth is used to doing this, where he'd just rattle on and get 12 points in, and then somebody says something like, no, you're not focusing. This guy's actually focusing, and he's doing it point by point. And when he does bring that up, to let Darth know, hey, okay, I'm going to say this. I'm repeating this in my own words, to give Darth the opportunity to correct him at that point in time, make sure that he doesn't derail. And Darth seems to act like this is an interruption. Like, you can kind of hear it in his voice that he's a little interrupted, and like like he's got to adjust and re-say the same thing again. Like, he's literally, I don't think at this point he's listening to JohnWick. Like, it's that's past him.
Necessary precondition for facts and the apprehension of all facts, or God is not the necessary precondition for all facts.
Okay, I agree that is that. I agree
now,
that
in a world where God is,
but in a world where man can, according to the Bible, suppress truth and unrighteousness, that fact is independent of God. So all of this is for nothing.
Exists, then by definition, he is the source of all facts.
Then that would mean he would have to be the source for your suppression of truth and unrighteousness, which means God would be personally keeping you from embracing him.
Your definition of God, yes.
Under that definition. So if somebody comes along and says, I possess a fact X, okay, and that I know that fact without reference to God.
Okay.
Now,
I agree with you.
If one fact is without reference to God, then all facts are without reference to God.
Yes.
Right. So if you say you lack belief, then you're also making the direct necessary implication is that you are in possession of a singular fact without reference to God.
Yes.
And if you can be in possession of even one singular fact without God, then if that's true, then it necessarily follows from that, then God does not exist.
But the fact that one can deny the truth of that God in their unrighteousness seems like that's something that's, I mean, and here's where the problem is. If he's like, well, no, it doesn't matter if one's doing that, because ultimately we exist because of God. Okay, then talking about intelligibility or epistemology in this way is more of just the same kind of thing. That's like saying, Good Will Hunting, he never would have solved that math problem in the movie and been discovered by MIT if his mom hadn't given birth to him. That seems to be all that Darth Dawkins is doing. Like, no, obviously, I think Good Will Hunting would have problems. Sorry, that character would have problems. Much more fundamental to his existence than not being able to solve the math problem in the movie. But that's really where he seems to be going with this. Well, nothing's intelligible without God. If there weren't a God, we would just be spitting gibberish at each other. Like, no. If there weren't a God, there wouldn't be anything else either, according to you. So try again. I don't know if this needs to be repeated at him like a bunch of times, but I feel like there's probably an institution somewhere where he could go and just sit in a chair next to a comfortable window and just have somebody kind of maybe repeat that point over and over until he kind of like, oh, okay, right, gotcha. And then maybe he'll quit harping on people's what he thinks is busted up epistemologies, because, well, if there's no God, then you can't balance your checkbook. Like, well, what?
So, if my soft atheism is dependent upon God, that means that God essentially God. I can't act out of accordance with God because everything is in accordance with God.
Right.
Sorry.
You're not okay. Right.
Well, no,
Listen,
I mean that means.
Let me try to illustrate it another way. Okay.
Okay.
If an apple is evidence for God,
oh boy,
then everything is evidence for God.
If an apple is
not, If an apple is evidence for God, then everything is.
Right, but getting back to his goofy little thing about the criterion of falsification that he brought up, this is interesting. The God that he's positing here is immune to falsification in the sense because literally every observation confirms it. So if I mean, unless I'm wrong, I don't know what Darth could see in quote unquote general revelation, which would just be the reality that we live in, that would be a disconfirmation of his God, when literally every fact is proof of God. This is one of the things that J. Robin does all the time. Like, well, do you have a falsifier for my God? It's ultimate and it's mine. It's the creator of all of it. No, because you can't have a falsifier for something that's defined as unfalsifiable. Literally anything that you say to J. Robin after that question, he just says the only reason that you can quote unquote lie to J. Robin and goof up an argument or fail or become irrational, demonstrate your irrationality, any of those like pejoratives the only reason that you can do that is because of his God. All of that crap is evidence of his God. Literally everything that J. Robin encounters in the world, at Darth Dawkins too, is evidence for their God. They're never going to observe something that's not that. So falsification is literally impossible with the thing that they're talking about. That's gone. So this idea like, well, it either is this way or it's not this way. Okay, fine. Okay. So what do you think? I don't believe there's a God. No, there is a God. Like all they have to do is like I'm not exactly sure why they are in Darth Dawkins, J. Robin, a lot of these guys are kind of in this where they start to go down a theological trail and then they jump over and then try to pull something that they think is in a metaphysics argument, some kind of philosophical argument. And they manage to just sort of kind of dick up both.
If an apple is not evidence for God, then nothing is.
And so my saying that I lack belief in God is evidence for God.
Do you accept these two propositions? If an apple is evidence for God, then everything is evidence for God. If an apple is not evidence for God, then nothing is evidence for God. Do you accept those two propositions?
If those two propositions
I wouldn't accept them because they don't really have any bearing on them. They're only connected to the first thing. Either that God is the source of all facts or that God is the source of no facts. But again, that's playing into sort of Darth Dawkins' already broken semantics game, because God is not the source of facts. He's the source of all things. Facts are what we think we know about actual states of affairs, the things that we can know either probabilistically to be true or most likely to be true, or maybe we're very certain, right? Like, if I have 2 + 2 = 4 or something like that, and even that's a little too abstract, but square circles, that kind of thing. Those are those kind of basic contradictions. We can be certain that those things aren't the case, right? Okay, so if you're trying to convince somebody that they can't, because that's essentially what how this whole thing seems to be going. I think Darth is still trying to convince JohnWick that agnosticism is impossible. That's all this is. That's all this heavy lifting is. At the end of this, maybe JohnWick could say, okay, you've convinced me. So I can't say that I don't know or I don't have a belief of. I'll just say there isn't one. And then now you get into an even bigger conversation. Like, I mean, it's this is truly amazing. All of this wrangling and semantics and rhetorical goofing around is just so that Darth can try to strangle the possibility of agnosticism to death and just get rid of it. Like, he doesn't want to deal with it. No, I will turn you first. I'm going to convince you that you're a hard atheist, and then once you're a hard atheist, I will demand you falsify a God that I have defined as unfalsifiable, because you can't do it because you don't have an absolute. And it's like, no, that's not the problem.
Are based on the Christian God that you're defining, then yes.
No, we're defining God as that which is unconditionally non-dependent.
Yes, if God is unconditionally non-dependent,
God is
then
is a personal entity, unconditionally non-dependent, and creator of all things that begin. Okay.
yes, in that case, then if the
right.
apple does prove God, yes,
listen,
I understand.
Listen, right now, you can forget about Christianity for the moment, because all we're just simply focusing on is the issue of atheism. Atheism is not simply the denial or rejection of the Christian God. It is the rejection of all gods. Okay?
It's no. It's not the rejection. I mean, hard atheism, anti-theism is the rejection, but soft atheism is not a rejection. And let me give you an example.
Let me explain.
Well, 1 second, Duncan, can I give you an example?
I have to stop you. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, it's because you're making. Dude, listen. Why don't you listen and learn?
Darth is forcing a logical entailment for something he hasn't shown. Yeah, well.
I hate to be so assertive here, but you're in left field right now, because you're making an error here. You're making a category error. Okay. It's because God is not.
Yeah, I should just point out for this I would love someone to say, okay, in a hypothetical where God is defined as X, then allow the script to continue. No, when people do that, Darth Dawkins fills his diaper. He lets loose. He becomes a real unhappy pappy. Very quickly. He hates that, right? And I don't know when I think that rage is probably around here too, because anytime somebody be like, yeah, I can entertain that. I can entertain your argument hypothetically. No, he just starts flipping out. Like he thinks that I don't know why. If somebody says that they're going to entertain his argument for the sake of argument, if they drop any language like that, he acts like they're out to get him, or they're trying to trick him somehow. It's odd.
God is not like any ordinary fact. God as a fact, okay, is in his own class. Okay.
This is interesting because I think most, depending on who you talk to, what philosophers you talk to, I think probably a basic thing. A fact for us is something that describes an actual state of affairs. Like today is Wednesday, right? Obviously not for people in Australia. It's not a fact for you, but some facts are relative. What do you know? But the idea that, okay, God is a fact that's in his own category. Why is that important, right? The idea that if it's a fact that there is a God, that means the fact of God is that the actual state of affairs is that this God exists. So why is that a special category? Like the fact that if you have to open with special pleading, you're probably not in a strong position. Especially when there's no real reason to do that, right? The basic claim that you're making is that there is a God, and not start to imply, well, when I say is God, it depends on my definition of is, because God is a very different thing than saying an apple is, or you are, or I am. I'm being needlessly pedantic, but so is Darth. So
God would be yes. God would be defined then as unconditionally non-dependent upon which everything derives. Mm-hmm. So God being a fact would not be the same thing as the fact that there's gold on Mars. Okay? Mm-hmm. In other words, everything doesn't depend upon gold on Mars. Something might have a relation or a connection to gold, either in proximity or in a great distance. But the point is this, is you're making a category error. Now, either everything depends upon God as the personal absolute, or nothing does. Okay, do you understand that before I move on?
That's interesting. He just slithered personal absolute into there, which I don't think he'd been using up to this point. Thank you for the super chat, Shatterhouse. Nobody should ever try to learn anything from Darth. Not theology, not politics, not science, especially not logic. Congrats, Jefferson. Buy a taco. Thank you. Actually, oh, that sounds good. There's a good taco truck on the other side of town. Thank you for the super chat and the idea. I'm going to violate my diet tomorrow.
Yes. Either everything depends
Okay.
on God or nothing.
Either
depends on
everything
God.
is derivative and is in reference to God, or nothing is in reference to God.
Got it.
Now, in a world where
In a
God
world.
exists, then everything exists in reference to God.
Why? I don't know why he says that. I mean, I know I poke fun at it almost every time, but why not just everything exists because of? What does he gain by saying everything exists in reference to God? Like that's not clear language. Just say because or due to.
In a
Yep.
world where God does not exist, nothing is in reference to God. So if you tell me you lack belief, you're also communicating to me that you are in possession of a singular fact, and you are in possession of that without reference to God.
That is
Now,
correct. If the if your
if
you
one
just talked over
fact,
me again. You just talked over me again, and I
the
was going
reason
to
why
help
I am
you.
because you're not understanding. Now,
I'm
if
agree-
even
This is hilarious. John Wick is agreeing with him. He's about to say that he agrees with them. He was trying to paraphrase it to see if he's tracking correctly, and Darth is taking this as an opportunity to just start squealing and act, I'm so misunderstood. Why don't you damn kids figure this out? Like, okay. If you just cut your hair and get a job, you'd know you get the cut of my jib.
with you.
one fact,
Crazy.
good. If even one fact does not need God to be referenced, then that's true of all facts.
If your definition of God is correct, that is true.
The issue is not correct. I'm saying in a world
Mm-hmm.
where God exists,
Where your definition of God exists.
all facts.
Yeah, now John Wick's getting into some dangerous territory because now he's starting to do that thing that Schefter was talking about. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Or is it Chef TR? Where like, like yeah, the God that you're defining exists, and he's gonna get he's gonna kick a dog to death or something if John Wick keeps pushing that button.
Facts. That's right. You need to.
I'm agreeing with you, Duncan. I'm agreeing.
Okay, good.
I'm not
So if somebody says I lack belief in God, they are also claiming to be in possession of a fact that they know they lack belief in God. And
That's
if they're
right.
in possession of a fact without reference,
But lacking a belief in God and the existence of that God, as he's told so many people, is not they're not the same thing. Just because I don't believe in a God, it doesn't follow. Like people have told him this many times, and he's not the only one. Many of his minions do the same thing. I don't think it makes sense. I'm not inclined to believe. I lack belief. A lot of them will open up, but just because you don't believe or are disinclined to believe, it doesn't follow from that that God doesn't actually exist. All right. So I'm not exactly sure why Darth can't take his own advice here.
to God, then no facts are in reference to God. And if no facts are in reference, then if no facts are in reference to God, then God can and does not exist.
I 100% agree with your logic. If wait, I'm not finished. If your definition of God is correct,
what other definition of God would we be working with that would be a minimal operational definition?
This is some special pleading coming up.
Can you prove?
And some appeals to consequentialism, because it's basically like, well, if you take some of the properties away that I think are necessary for my God, it leads to things I'd rather not deal with, and therefore it's impossible. But he doesn't demonstrate why it would be impossible. He just he just flails about and says, no, that's the God that all philosophers believe in. That's the God of the Bible. He just makes appeals to a standard that's supposedly been established. This is the same thing that happens when he talks about it being ultimate. J. Robin does this too when he refers to something as ultimate. I should have caught him in this in the conversation I was having last time. Ultimate, they say it's a noun, but it is a noun, but it's a grab bag of all the other properties that they smuggle in, and then they can kind of pull those out of that grab bag whenever they need them. Like, oh, did I mention it was personal? Well, it is. Why is it personal? Because in my because the definition of God that I would hold to, in order for it to be ultimate, it has to be a personal being, it has to be a mind, it has to be eternal, and blah 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 blah. Right? But then they get cagey about the other things. Does it also have to be morally perfect? Wait 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. I don't think that has any bearing on this conversation, or something like that, right? That's when the dodge starts. But you get the drift. Ultimate is the bag they put their toys in, and then they pull out the ones in order to kind of impress you or distract you from something. And then when you ask them, like, okay, well, since we're talking about the God of the Bible, where's that omniscience? Where's that in your bag labeled ultimate? Where's the omnibenevolence? Ignore that for now. Let's just talk about the fact that it's ultimate, and that you need to acknowledge that a God has to exist in order for you to make the claim that you don't believe in it, because that's ultimately what Darth is doing here, and it's bonkers. It has been for years. It doesn't make any sense. He knows this is not the case. Somebody's belief or conviction or lack of conviction in a being doesn't have any bearing on the actual existence of the thing that they either believe, claim to believe, or are disinclined to believe. Those are two different things. On top of, the being and knowing. Ugh. This is exhausting.
That's true.
The issue is not the issue.
How do you know your definition of God is correct?
Listen, you know what your problem is? I now figured it out. You don't have the habit of focusing tightly on the topic at hand. Your mind is constantly segueing, and I don't think you're doing it on purpose. Your mind is segueing onto.
Now he's going to confuse him with being, which is interesting because he's not. When he was being impatient when John Wick was pausing to make sure that he was tracking. Every time he made a new point, every time he added something new into what he was into his assertion, he was going, and Darth was getting kind of frustrated with that. If you let him talk and he lays out all this stuff, and you pick something too early, or maybe in the middle of what he was talking about, like, okay, as for that point right there, I'd like to talk about that. Well, then you're not focusing on it, because what you need to do is swallow all of that whole, all of the fallacies, all of the special, all that stuff, and then figure out how to disprove it after he's insulated himself from what he thinks is criticism and rebuttal. This is a great point. Minimal operational definition. Everything is dependent on God. That's a very maximal minimal. Yeah, exactly. That was the point I was making before. If you define the God as the absolute foundation for everything, then everything that you encounter or observe is proof of that God. So it's really magical how that works out. Like everything's proof for God because everything's made by God and everything's because of God. I don't think he understands that that's the big weakness for his position. That's not a strength. And I believe people have pointed that out to him.
Semi-related issues. Okay, that's the problem in the conversation.
Duncan, I'm not telling you how you think. Please don't tell me how I think.
Ooh.
No, I'm observing.
Ooh, John Wick is chiding him, and I think he actually comprehended it. Thank you for the super chat, Tyler West. The more Darth talks, the less parsimonious God gets. Yeah, and I think that's a common trend amongst a lot of preceptors. Thank you again for that super chat, Tyler.
How you're thinking out of the Bible says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Well, if we're going to include that as part of,
okay, but that right there is a theological claim that he's making, and he's getting that from the Bible. So if you're not inclined towards having weirdos spit Bible passages at you, that right there is a dick move. That is a passive-aggressive dig, because what he's doing right there is saying that I can impugn your motives, and I'm going to use this Bible verse to do it. From your heart, you speak these things. The only reason that makes any sense is because he can claim that he knows John Wick's heart, and he doesn't. He's not even willing to accept his category. John Wick has told him that he's an agnostic, or at least that's his stance, is an agnostic one in terms of belief in a Christian God. And Darth Dawkins, has been this entire time trying to railroad John Wick into acknowledging that there's no such thing as agnosticism. That's been the whole point of this effort. And now that John Wick is asking questions and has been following along patiently this entire time, Darth is giving himself the permission to impugn John Wick's reason, his motives for talking, and his quote unquote tactics because the Bible allows him to, and because John Wick is just a filthy sinner. And it's going to become apparent because the sin, it's not your fault, John. Well, it is in Darth's mind. Calvinists would be like that, right? Like, well, it's not their fault that they're sinning a-holes. That's the sin doing that, right? But in Darth's case, he doesn't track that far over to Calvinism because that's not appealing for him because he needs to be able to judge people. Sinning's your fault. Being an a-hole is your fault. There's nothing wrong with your heart. You need to get yourself regenerated with God somehow. I guess you can bypass the Holy Spirit and like just squeeze really hard, fill your diaper, and poof, convince yourself that God's real and that you've repented and that you're part of the gang. And then you're in. Welcome to Darth's church. It's based on works.
For the conversation, I would tell you that the way that you're operating is on a script. And when I try to ask you about your script, you get upset at me.
Everybody's operating on a script, sir.
What?
If I'm all over the place, how am I operating on a script?
No, you're operating from the script.
Which script?
You are either you are consciously or unconsciously committed to an impersonal absolute. Now, if you deny that,
okay, but you just smuggled in the absolute part. So the only thing that John Wick is disagreeing with is whether or not the absolute is personal or impersonal, because it kind of sounded like he might have an issue with the absolute part. But maybe Darth wasn't paying attention to that from 22 minutes ago.
Then it's game over, lights out.
If I deny that if I'm doing what?
If you deny that your statements of contingency are not derivative of an impersonal absolute, it's game over, lights out.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to.
No, that it's only game over, lights out from Darth's cockeyed philosophy, right? But that follows, right? Like all he's done is like, well, you can't tell me I'm wrong because everything in the world that I observe convinces me that there's a God. The fact that you're not convinced that there's a God just means that you're wrong. So if you're going to assert anything other than my Christian God, I don't have to pay attention to that because that's clearly wrong. Everything is evidence of God. Darth can't be wrong about that, which has got to be super fucking comforting. But the massive problem with that is that is an irrational position, because if that thing can't be disproved in any real way, you've set yourself up into a position where you could just be confirming that. It's just constant confirmation bias. How convinced are you of that? Well, he doesn't have to worry about that. He doesn't need an argument. He just needs this definition. And because this definition puts him in this weird kind of loop, I think he feels like philosophy's done all it needs to do, at least for him. I might be getting that wrong. That might be lacking a little sense, maybe. I don't know. Getting a little tangled here.
Make that claim. I'm going to say that I don't know if that's claim.
Right. Okay. So now focus on what we're talking about here now.
Sure.
If you are in possession of a single fact without God, then God doesn't exist.
So I'm going to concede that no God.
You are breaking up.
I'm sorry. I am going to concede that I can't know anything without God.
Well, then you can't tell me that you lack belief in God then.
I can't know anything without God. Therefore, my soft atheism is dependent upon God being the source of my soft atheism.
No, hold on.
Yep. I know that I don't believe in God, but it seems like the reason that I believe that is because of God. This is a pretty good move from John Wick. I like this. And I think I've heard this one used before.
Hold on. Okay.
I think you could actually hear him like put his head in his hands or something with this one, which is funny because you might think that John Wick is being dense here, but this. I'm trying to think of how this could be like considered a bad move, but I can't.
I'm trying to explain to you that your presentation that you merely lack belief that doesn't constitute denial of God is a mistaken analysis of your own opinion. Because
Well, I would.
the statement I lack belief necessarily entails, in virtue of its position, the negation of God, even though the person has reason to themselves that they're not denying it.
Right. So the fact that that person can say it, right? This is the problem for Darth. If that person's saying it, they're a liar. And if they're lying, that's because of God. If that person really believes it, their soft atheism, their agnosticism, is because of God.
Okay. Well,
let me give you an illustration. Have you ever played the game with somebody? You grab them by the wrist, okay, and you hold their palm up, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So their palm is facing the ceiling.
Yeah.
Oh, God, this is terrible. I love this. His train of thought is like a boost. Thanks, Thomas. The law of radioactive decay is a fact. It tells us the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Is that contingent with his God? Unfortunately, no. And even though that fact represents general revelation, he will spit on general revelation because that contradicts the stories in special revelation. So try again, Tyler. You got to know a fundy better than that. He's not just going to listen to reason.
So you can do this to children. You can do it to adults. And if they haven't seen it before, most people fall prey to this. So you grab them by the wrist with their palm up, and then you take your right. You grab them with your left hand. You hold them by the wrist. Then you take your index finger, and you hold it as close to their palm as possible without touching it, so that maybe there's about a millimeter gap between the tip of your finger and their palm. And you hold it there for like 20 seconds, okay? And then you say to them, you look at them, you say, "Am I touching you?" What do people say?
Hopefully you don't say it as creepy as that, because that's probably going to get you kneed in the groin. But yeah, so if you guys have heard this one before, you take someone's hand, you grab them by the wrist with your left hand, take your right hand, or vice versa, and then pull the palm towards you. You put your finger very, very close to their palm, and then look deeply into their eyes, and as Darth said, "Am I touching you?" Spoiler alert, it's a trick question.
Say.
Well, because of the fact that one of our senses is I can't remember the name of it, is proximity. They actually feel it. They actually feel the proximity of you to your hand.
John, you see, this is the problem in the whole conversation. You don't know how to focus on what I'm saying. This is the biggest problem.
That they're holding on to their wrist.
John, listen to me.
That wasn't me.
My
I'm
finger.
sorry.
I know it was. I know. Okay.
Yeah.
You gotta focus. Okay. You gotta.
I agree, Darth Dawkins. Focus does need to be demonstrated here, and I'm not exactly sure how this hand thing indicates anything close to it. And I'm still trying to figure out what this hand trick thing has anything to do with God making me an atheist. Yeah. And the thing is that the answer to the question is both yes and no. It depends on what they mean. Watch Chuckle Bunny get this.
You got to keep your mind from straying to semi-related topics.
By Chuckle Bunny, I mean Darth Dawkins.
So when they're looking at my finger hovering 1 millimeter over their palm, okay?
Yeah.
They can see that my fingertip is not touching their palm. And I look at them and I say, "Am I touching you?" And the overwhelming majority of people What's their answer?
I don't know. Tell me.
The answer is, and I've done this to many people, the answer is they say, no, you're not touching me. And I say, are you sure?
I see what you're doing.
And
Okay.
they go, yes. And so not only are they verbalizing the proposition, you are not touching me, they intently believe that you're not touching them. And then what you do is you lift your left hand up.
Yeah. Thanks for the super chat. Mark, I hope I'm pronouncing it. Is it Gamache? I want to pronounce it like Ganache. Barry Stroud killed transcendental arguments in 1968. Precept is to philosophy as young earth is to science. Yeah, I agree with that. Thanks again for the super chat.
That's holding the wrist and saying, I'm not touching you.
Yeah, because you're holding their wrist. Okay.
Right.
What does that illustrate?
What it illustrates is that people can have an intent belief while they're focusing on one thing, while they're unaware of something that they're denying, that what they were denying was actually false, or in other words, their denial was false.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, Secular Pagan Mom, for that super sticker. I did not know what those were, the super stickers. I got to tell you. That was all part of the monetization thing. I finally finalized all this stuff yesterday. And I'm like, do you want to do super stickers? I'm like, well, sounds fun, I guess. Actually, if you click on, I think if you enable one or the other, it enables both. So super chat or a super sticker. But I wasn't real familiar with them. So yeah. So Spooky Bed here. First super chat. Congratulations. I think you might have had to go. Secular Pagan Mom, special congrats. You're the first super sticker purchaser. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I still don't really understand what they are, but congratulations and thank you again. And let my hand go, you creepy fuck.
Okay, so when somebody says, I lack belief in God, but I'm not denying that God exists, that statement is just as guilty of somebody being unaware that what they believe and their proposition is false. Because when you say, I lack belief in God, mm-hmm. you are also maintaining implicitly that you are in possession of a singular fact without reference to God. Now, if you can apprehend and assert one fact without reference to God, in that world, God cannot exist.
Okay.
Because by definition, in a world where God exists, all facts would only exist and be apprehendable in reference to God. So the statement, yes. I lack belief, but I don't deny the existence of God, is false.
In that world, yes.
Is false. Can't believe how quickly Jeff sold out. Tisk tisk. I know. Once they hit me up with the monetization process and they were like, super stickers are available, I was like, yeah, I'm cashing in. I'm a capitalist now. Yeah. Thanks, Carlton. Oh, Maya's already trying to get the Carlton Winston jealous. That's pretty good, Maya. And yeah, Maya said something earlier. Jeff sounds stingy to other streamers. My apologies. Let's see. Oh, there it is. He keeps saying the same thing over and over again after I agree with him because he doesn't know what to do with people who agree with him. Yeah, I've noticed that too with this one. Outside of like, him getting noticeably kind of frustrated with you, JohnWick, when you would paraphrase things that did seem to track with what he was talking about, and like, you could kind of hear the like frustration starting to build, like he was going to have to like change his wording around or something because you just weren't getting it. Now it's like if you just sort of accept this, like, okay, all right, all facts depend upon God. Neat. What does that have? So, but he hasn't really addressed what you brought up many minutes ago when like, oh, my soft atheism is dependent upon God. Then he didn't want to touch that. Instead, he got into the hand thing, which just seems to be like, people can be like, the whole point of that is basically to like mess with people's perceptions about what they mean, right? Because am I touching you and somebody is fixated on, are you being touched with that index finger? Well, so they're right and they're wrong, because you could get super semantic, like, no, I'm holding your hand, so I'm touching you. Like, yeah, you're touching me, but that's holding. This is touching, point. Maybe it works better if you ask them the question the Darth Dawkins way. Am I touching you?
No. When the atheist says, I lack belief in God, but my position is not the negation of God, that statement is false.
Yes, because my statement depends on God being the source, being independent and
So do you understand? So do you
Mhm.
understand the atheist who says, I lack belief, but my position does not negate God? In fact, their position does negate God. Necessarily.
In that world, yes.
No, you're not understanding it.
I'm sorry. Am I disagreeing with you?
It's the issue. The issue.
Always a good question. Am I disagreeing with you? That's a trick question for Darth. I'm pretty sure he just assumes everyone's disagreeing with him.
The issue.
Dawkins, am
is,
I disagreeing with you?
In their statement that they lack belief in God, that statement means that they're in possession of a fact without reference to God.
I agree.
From that statement, their position entails the falsity of God.
I agree.
So therefore, somebody who maintains that they lack belief in God, but their position does not negate God, simply doesn't understand that the very supposition, I lack belief in God, entails the falsity of God.
Yeah, they're under a misapprehension about God.
He's being a lot more charitable than because I really can't get past this, because this doesn't make any sense. This just seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding of what a belief is. If someone is saying that I lack a belief in God in this case, they're talking about their psychological inclination. I know people there are a lot of people out there that hate atheism and that all kind of crap, but an agnostic position is an actual position. You can be kind of in the middle on this. I think most agnostics probably are tending to lead one way or the other. Where they might be more inclined to believe that there's something supernatural out there, or they're less inclined to think that there's anything supernatural out there, but maybe they're open to some kind of explanations about it. It just sort of depends. But again, it's about the psychological state of belief. I'm still trying. I always struggle with this, and this is from back in the heyday. Given that this was before the pandemic, this was when he was really kind of hitting this hard. And I'm not exactly sure why. I do know why. He got tired of having to deal with lactheists and people that were giving him those answers, so he wanted to just nuke this and if anybody thought that this was legitimate, right? Like, he should be getting some kind of prize in philosophy for eliminating the possibility of an agnostic position. I don't think anyone in philosophy is going to acknowledge that that's happened.
Exactly. And
yeah.
so that's okay. So we've wasted now over an hour here, where you were telling me that your position does not negate the existence of God, and I just demonstrated to you that it does.
I'm sorry. I felt I was agreeing with you.
Jody Wheeler, a plea for no more spooky "Am I touching you" voice. I'm going to have nightmares tonight. Yeah, sorry, Jody. And thanks for the super chat. I apologize if you felt compelled to pay me to stop. That's not exactly how I wanted that to go. Thanks again.
Well, in the beginning, now it seems that you are, but in the beginning, when I initially explained it to you, you said, no, my position does not negate the existence of God. I just merely withhold belief.
And then, yes, and under your description of what God is, there is no other choice but to agree.
No, sir. If you remove,
I'm sorry. I'm not disagreeing with. I'm not.
If you remove, all right, fine. So now your position is the negation of the existence of God. Do you understand?
Yes, if if the premise one, in a world where God exists with the definition that we provided, there is no way to say that my position on God is not dependent upon God.
Is that controversial to you?
No. If that's the
Okay,
definition
good.
of God that we're using,
Right. Good.
then I have no choice but to agree
Well,
with you.
what other definition of God would preclude God being personal and unconditionally non-dependent?
Oh, I don't know. I can think of a few. Thanks, Converse Contender. Yeah, I think this edgy debate me, bro. Yeah, he says I have criticized Darth on some of those same points. Yeah, I think I've been around for some of this, and this going back for years. I think you might have been a little bit more involved, or you had more conversations back then in the day, crossed paths with them. I don't know if you do now or not. And I just wanted to point out, thank you, Mark, for that super sticker. I still don't know how those work. What the hell? Do you have to hit like the star thing? I have no idea. Sorry, folks, still learning this. It's my first day.
Because if you talk about God and you remove the concept of God being personal and unconditionally non-dependent, all you're just simply invoking is some other dependent object like a stone or a leaf, and you're calling that God.
No.
So, how would you know it's unconditionally non-dependent? How do you know that? There's no way for you. You can't confirm that epistemologically, and you couldn't confirm it ontologically. There's no way for a human to do that. You wouldn't be able to verify that. So, it has to be that. Cool. It's interesting that the thing that it needs to be, this unconditionally non-dependent fact or being or whatever, just so it happens to be like that centerpiece of its existence is something that you could never know was false, and you could never prove ontologically in any real way. You can't demonstrate that, at least not in any way that I can imagine that you could. Right. This is sort of like the omniscience kind of thing. If this being came to you, imagine it was God's knowledge, and it wasn't any of this like middle knowledge stuff that supposedly Jesus has, where it's God, but he's a man, so he's got some limited faculties because our brains only can hold so much. But imagine a being that comes to you and knows absolutely everything and tells you that it does know absolutely everything. You can't know that it knows absolutely everything. You can't know that. You have to just trust it. Now, it doesn't matter how many times. That's the reason why it's unfalsifiable, right? I mean, the only thing, if it never got anything wrong, it could be lying to you too. But in situations where you're trying to ask it for something and it manages to get everything that you get right, you've got all these positive observations that, like, yeah, it knew that it was adopted. I didn't even know I was adopted. This kind of shit. Eventually you're going to get to questions that you can ask that you can't know. You're not going to be able to verify them one way or the other. And because you can't verify them, you have an epistemic limitation, and you have to take this being's claims of omniscience to some degree on faith. So this idea that, like, well, it has to be this particular it has to fit this concept. Neat. But we can't verify that. That has almost no meaning. Like, let's say that that's there, and that's off in the distance, in the corner, undergirding reality, whatever you want to call it. There's no way to know whether or not that's real or not. We can't verify the scope of ultimate in this sense.
No, I'm not. That's not my intention.
Okay, good. So look, if you don't want to take my word for it, I will be more than happy to send you either, because I got to go to bed tonight, send you a book. It's called The Myth of Religious Neutrality.
I've read that book.
Oh, you have?
Mm-hmm. I disagree with a lot.
When did you read it?
I'm going to read this one. The fact that he can't maintain the same argument with people who worship different gods negates his definition, and for that matter, his whole argument. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that, Maya. Benghazi, nice to see you, Benghazi. Jeff needs an Amazon wish list in the mix too. Yeah, I think the last thing any of you guys want me to get is maybe a camera. You know. a camera and a bottle of vodka, because I think that would lead to some bad things. It'd be great for some haters. I would imagine that those streams would be interesting afterward. The reaction streams of that hangout. Hey AJ, how's it going?
When did you read it?
Let's see, like 2 weeks ago, I think.
And how did you acquire it?
It's a PDF. Friend of mine loaned it to me.
Who was your friend?
A friend of mine who is my friend. You don't know who my friend is. If I say Tom,
okay.
You don't know who Tom is.
This is so this is so weird.
Before you go, and I know you.
How did you acquire it?
2 weeks ago.
When did you read it? Would he point? We'll send you either because I got to go to bed in a minute. To send you a book. It's called The Myth of Religious Neutrality.
I've read that book.
Would he point? Oh, you have?
Mm-hmm. I disagree with a lot.
When did you read it? When did you read it?
Let's see, like 2 weeks ago, I think.
It's so weird that he's getting in on this. Like, when did you read it? When did you read it? Like, he automatically, I think he just suspects that he's being lied to here. So.
And how did you acquire it?
It's a PDF. Friend of mine loaned it to me.
Who was your friend?
A friend of mine who is my friend. You don't know who my friend is. If I say Tom,
Okay.
You don't know who Tom is. Well, before you go, and I know you have to go.
Well, hold on a second. That's not an easy book to get a hold of, and it's extremely expensive.
I just looked it up, and these guys are already talking about it in there. You can get it for. It looks like it's still in print. There's a revised edition. Kindle edition is $31.49. Hardcover is $48.92. Those are maybe they're being sold by other sellers. Yeah, buy used. Looks like those are older copies. But the Kindle version is $30. Well, 31. Yeah. Looks like it's something of a college text, probably available to like seminary students. And if Darth had been paying attention instead of trying to prove that JohnWick is lying to him about this book, he would have picked up on the fact that JohnWick said it was a PDF from his friend. So.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering, why an atheist would be inclined to read that?
I think
that's an atheist. Is your friend
no,
an
my
atheist?
friend is not. No, my friend is a theology instructor. So
okay.
Now I know you have to go in a few. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions about God?
Sure, go ahead. But I have to go in a few minutes.
I know you do have to go.
We can resume this tomorrow or the next day. I'm on regularly here.
I have
so go ahead with your questions.
I appreciate that. Thank you. In order for God to exist, free will has to exist. The God that we're talking about. We're talking about the Christian God of the Bible, right?
I don't use the word free will. I use agency.
Agency. Okay.
Right, because free will is usually just has been beaten up by lots of different skeptics and philosophers and stuff like that. It's problematic. So it's interesting to hear him say this, even though this was 3 years ago. Oh, I don't use free will, I use agency. Why? So you can skirt around the problem? I'm glad that I watched this video from start to finish, at least for that, so that if I hear one of these guys say agency, I'm just going to ask them, by agency, do you mean free will?
But in order for us to make choices by which we are judged, we need to have free agency or just agency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can a schizophrenic choose not to be a schizophrenic?
Ooh, this is some Shannon Q style territory here.
Can a schizophrenic choose not to be a schizophrenic? Let me put
it in your language. Does a schizophrenic who's born with the genetic with the problem of schizophrenia, do they have the agency to say, I no longer want to be schizophrenic?
I would say no.
Okay. Schizophrenics cannot perceive, and I know this very well because my brother is schizophrenic. A schizophrenic does not have the agency to correctly.
Listen, I'm very familiar with these psychiatric categories. I've studied it quite a bit when I was younger.
Okay.
Studied it or been diagnosed with it? Sorry, cheap shot.
I live with it, so
go on.
So my
Good.
question.
Yeah,
So When my brother-in-law, who believes that he is God, dies, how is he judged fairly?
That's going to be in the hands of God, who is completely righteous and just. And I'm not worried how God will deal with people who are brain damaged, even from birth.
Well, if God is the agent of everything, he made them brain damaged.
Actually, the brain damage is a result of God's temporal judgment. So that's why we have illness, sickness, death, and even brain damage. It is a consequence of God's temporal judgment. And do you have a problem with that?
I don't know what temporal judgment means, so I don't know what.
Well,
Yeah, AJ, by studied psychology, he had to look up the terms that were coming from the therapist that was confronting him. That's my guess.
I don't know what you mean by temporal judgment.
Well, when God told Adam and Eve not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if they ate thereof, there would be severe consequences. Now, we have a limited perspective of what was said. There may have been more than was said, but what we do have is said is that dying you shall die. Okay? As a consequence of man's rebellion.
Dying you shall die. Deep. This moment was what I was working for the whole time. Yeah, I could tell, because once you finally got that's a long time to wait to get to ask him a question, and then you get him with the schizophrenia thing, and I think he's basically leading to what I think most of these people would be like, I don't care. Like, we all die, God will sort it out, I guess. I think it's probably going to be his answer.
God cursed the planet in a temporal judgment. That's why we have physical death. That's why we have suffering and illnesses.
Yeah, the whole world suffers because two people did something wrong.
The whole world suffers that because God created them as federal representatives of the human race, so that there could be a federal representative for salvation.
Did they know that?
Do they?
I liked how this question made him pause. I thought this was interesting.
Did they know that before the fact?
Yes.
I would say probably not. The issue is simply this: is they knew that God was God, and that there was no basis to question his revelation.
But it's not revelation in that sense, right? It's not revelation in the sense that he usually appeals to that term. Revelation for us is it's going to be the combination of things. That's the blanket category, and the subcategories are general and special. In their case, they're directly talking to the being. So yeah, that's general and special. They have no reason to doubt it. He's right there. And they're in the midst of a garden with them, and there's effing magical fruit hanging around in places. So yeah, I mean, they might be a little credulous about some things, but do they have reason to doubt that he's God? Maybe not.
It was simply a choice. Either we submit to God's loving revelation, okay, or we choose to be satanic, which is what Satan did. I will be like the.
We choose to be satanic, like Satan did. Satan chose to be satanic. How hard does that rock? That's how hard Satan rocks, because he simply had to choose to be him. So when people are like, you do you, Satan went and did that. And that's how hardcore that is. So Satan did himself, so to speak. And when we follow suit and try to do the Satan thing, that's what makes us condemned. This is sort of bonkers. I've heard a lot of different explanations for this, but this is actually kind of bizarre. I wonder if Darth thinks that the snake is Satan, because depending on how you read it, it's not. So this is kind of interesting, because it's at times like this where I suspect like some of his understanding of the Bible really never got out of Sunday school. So
Most High. When Adam and Eve chose to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they chose to be satanic. They chose to be autonomous, but they had no reason or basis to choose that
because they didn't have knowledge of good and evil, right?
Well, they didn't have experiential knowledge of good and evil.
They didn't have experiential knowledge of good and evil, but they had the ability to choose to be like Satan. They chose to be satanic. So if they don't have any experiential aspect of evil, how did they have the capacity to choose to become evil? This doesn't make any sense, because part of this also goes back to Darth talking about people relying on their own autonomy. These are individuals who are in a, and I think he probably believes this because he's probably heard apologists like torture this particular explanation to death, that the real issue isn't the fact that they partook of the tree. The real issue was that Eve thought for herself. I swear to you, I've actually heard this explanation. Many of you probably have heard apologists use this way. They'll actually use that language. Well, the problem is that she went and thought for herself, made an evaluation about the claims that God made versus the claims Talking Snake made about this tree, weighed that with her desire to eat that particular fruit, and then went ahead and took a chance and took a bite. Finding that the fruit was in fact good, she gave it to Adam. Like, you got to get in on this. And then Adam ate it. And then they're like, oh shit, party's over. And that set off like the alarm. Like I don't know if there's like a ring camera on the tree or something, but Darth Yahweh sees that, and he's like, oh shit, somebody's in the forbidden part of the garden. Shows up there like, what did I tell you about that? Yeah, but the snake, God, the snake is pretty smart. So God left a few things out, right? Like, don't eat that fruit, right? He probably should have told them, by the way, there is a particularly charismatic serpent who lives in that tree, and he will try to get you to do things. Don't talk to that guy. Avoid the charismatic serpent. He's a tricky one. Then they could have asked him real questions like, really? Where did that come from? Did you make him, or is he like a plenty of problems wrong with this story? So I love getting into this kind of stuff with Darth, and it took him 36 minutes or so to get Darth to the point where he's actually talking about Bible stories, and this is where Darth really does not do well.
Okay, that sounds a little. I'm going to be honest with you. That sounds a little bit.
Have we resolved the issue about what God's going to do with the brain damaged?
Well, I think that's impossible for us to know, for either you or I to know, right? And I think that's.
I didn't make a claim that I did. Now,
I know. I think
from a reformed perspective,
mm-hmm.
which I'm not reformed. I'd lean in that direction. Somebody who's reformed would say, well, that person, eternal destiny, has to do with whether they were elect or not. Okay.
This is chicken shit here, because here's where he's done. Like, a reformed person will be like, well, whether that person's destiny in heaven or hell is based on whether or not they're elect. Darth is going to skip out on whether or not he can commit to whether or not the schizophrenic is actually culpable and gets sent to hell, or is innocent and goes to heaven, even though the reason he's not a Calvinist is because he does not believe in the elect working that way. He holds to just enough Arminianism, because he's a jerk. He holds to the worst of both worlds, right? There, you have this non-conditional, this non-dependent, unconditional, ultimate being that has determined all of reality and has laid it out, and our minds are completely dependent on him. Absolutely all of reality is guided by him, set in motion by him, and it is sustained by his energy throughout time. So one could say that, anything that you do, good or evil, is actually part of God's plan. However, in order to be able to condemn you personally for screwing up and making bad choices and disagreeing with him, Darth can't commit to Calvinism, because Calvinism, you wouldn't really, if you internalize it correctly, you wouldn't actually make the connection there. You wouldn't make that leap. There are people that are doing these things. People in sin would be like the kind of, you would kind of pity a person who is being bamboozled by sin and the temptations of dark forces in the same way that we would take pity on someone who has mental health issues. And Darth does not want to do that. He doesn't want to commit to that view of the effect of sin. He still wants to be able to blame people individually because punishment is the name of the game. That's what he's in this for. He doesn't care about salvation as much as he cares about bad people, quote unquote, in his mind, getting it in the end. And they need to get it good and hard. From Daddy. Sorry, couldn't stop myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my point of view is whatever God, however he dispenses them, will be a complete act of righteousness and justice. I'm not.
Well, that's super convenient, but whether or not you're a Calvinist or Arminian kind of determines whether or not how that's being done is righteous or just.
I'm not worried about what God is going to do with the brain damaged.
But shouldn't you? I mean, it's a fact, right? If they're brain damaged, then they can't be held accountable to what they're doing, regardless of how evil it is. So they should go to heaven. They should be healed and go to heaven, right? He's already said he doesn't conform to Calvinism, so he doesn't believe that they're just automatically elected to go to hell or automatically elected to go to heaven. This is how lazy this stuff is, right? Oh, I'm not going to weigh in on what God's going to do with a person in that sense. Why wouldn't you? Why not? What protects that individual from somebody who you believe is of sound mind and body? Like a human being who is of sound mind and body doesn't have any of these limitations, therefore they're completely culpable for the sin of Adam and Eve. But a schizophrenic person might not. That's as generous as Darth's going to get. Great system you got there, Darthy.
Why not?
The only brain damaged people that God are going to judge are registered Democrats.
Cheap shot and corny.
That's funny, but I think it kind of it doesn't really address my question. I mean, I think that the problem that I have with this explanation of God, right, and that really is what it boils down to me, is that people try to explain God to me, and I don't believe their explanation. I was like, so my summation is
yeah,
there may be a
operating
God.
at a you're not at no you're not. You are either operating from the starting point that there is a personal, absolute, unconditionally non-dependent,
what?
Irreducible primary.
Is that what he's doing? You never really established that. Like, I love this. Darth has figured this out for him. Like, oh, the one that you believe in is impersonal. All that other stuff, yep. It either has to be all that crap plus it's personal, or all that crap it's impersonal. And naturally, if it's impersonal, that just doesn't cut the mustard. So,
or you're believing in an impersonal, irreducible primary. There's no escaping it.
And I'm saying, I don't think you or I know if either of those is true. That there may be an option that neither one of us know.
No, you're what you're doing now is you're just.
Why? That was an interesting answer to that question. No, right? JohnWick is making a relatively, I think, a reasonable, like there could be another option other than it's this this absolute foundation. It's personal or impersonal. Those are the only two choices. Really? What if it's not that? What if it's something completely different, something that you never took into account, something you couldn't possibly imagine? Then what?
Appealing to irrationality.
Why is that appealing to? It's appealing to irrationality to suggest there's a dichotomy when you have no demonstration of a dichotomy. You're insisting that it's one or the other, and you can't demonstrate how you got there, other than to say, well, a dichotomy is this thing either is or it isn't. Neat. I'm going to go with isn't. Next move, chump.
No. I mean, I'm making a rational argument. I can't.
No, you're not. You're saying okay. What you're asserting is we cannot know that the personal absolute exists. That's your position.
No, I'm saying that you're using a black and white fallacy. And let me illustrate it. I'm going to ask you a question,
All right,
and
listen,
I need you to answer either A or B. No, this is really
Oh, getting tired. Oh, wow, look at the time.
I
just
don't.
really quick, Duncan.
I have to go. We're going to write it down.
Let me ask you one more question. It'll be really
you got
quick.
60 seconds, and we'll have to resume this tomorrow or Saturday. Okay?
Thank you for your.
No, I'm really not trying to blow you off. I got it.
I understand. It's late.
He's not trying to blow it. Ooh.
I have either $10 in my pocket or $100 in my pocket, and
Right.
there is no other choice. Which one is it?
Well, you're making a category error. Okay.
No. I'm making a black and white.
I'm answering you.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I interrupted you. That was wrong for me.
Well, it may be the case that you either have A or B. Okay.
Mhm.
You could say that, like for example, I could say, tomorrow you will either eat a cheeseburger or a slice of pizza and you're confined to the house, right? Now you might say, well, what's the third option? You could eat nothing at all. Okay. Now you can offer A or B. Now the way to get out of that is for somebody to say, well, there's a third possibility.
Yes.
Okay. And then you have to show that there's a possibility. But simply
You have to demonstrate. No, you just have to posit the possibility that there could be one. I love. Why do these ding dongs do this? They're like, no, yeah, okay. Well, if you've got a third possibility, then I need you to prove to me what it is. Right? You could speculate that it could be a lot of different things. Like, well, do you have any proof that that's what it is? Do you have any proof that this ultimate foundation that you believe in is personal or impersonal? Do you have definitive proof that it is one rather than the other? The answer is you can't know that. They cannot know that. They just insist that must be personal because that solves other problems that could come about that could happen later. Matt Slick and Didi both have shit dichotomies. Slick has been roaming around Clubhouse, still making the shit argument with disjunctive. Yeah, his goofiness. Yeah, I've heard some people that have had conversations with him, and he's kind of just gone back to. I think he's just wound it back like anything that Alex Malpass told him and corrected him on. It's as if it never happened.
saying A or B is not necessarily a fallacy.
It is a fallacy. I'm sorry.
It's only a fallacy. Okay, offering A or B is only a fallacy is if you can offer a third possibility.
No. No, like you read The Myth of Religious Neutrality, but you haven't read anything on the internet that explains why this is wrong. Darth Dawkins, seriously, read some stuff outside of the theological realm.
No, that's an argument from ignorance.
No, you're not understanding.
I do understand
because you see, look, listen.
And I'm sorry, I'm keeping you up.
Somebody could say that's a fault. Somebody said there could be a false dichotomy.
Yes.
It's only a false dichotomy, right? It's only a false dichotomy is if you can present a third possibility. You don't have to prove the third possibility. You just have to show that it's possible.
But you're saying you're saying that it's impossible that there is no other alternative.
Right. Well,
am I misrepresenting you? I don't want to do.
No.
Yeah, that's a good question from JohnWick, right? He's saying it must be the one or the other. It can't be anything else. And he's saying, oh, you could entertain this third possibility, but you got to demonstrate what it is first. Oh, so I have to demonstrate the reality of a third possibility, but you don't have to demonstrate the personal or the impersonal. He just prefers the personal because that's that matches his theological preferences.
No, there's no other option between a personal absolute or an impersonal absolute.
That means I'm sorry.
If you reject either A or not A in this scenario, okay, then you're going to be left with no absolute at all. And if you say either that there is no absolute, or you
Why is that? That's weird.
don't know of the absolute, then that acknowledgement will eviscerate all intelligibility.
That you don't know it? And to what extent do you have to know it? You can't, God's a mystery, right? I mean, there's certain aspects of God, like even Darth couldn't answer what God, the question about what God is going to do with schizophrenics. But if you're not familiar with this absolute, if it's not an absolute and you don't know that it's an absolute, that eviscerates intelligibility. How? How is that connected to anything? It's like, oh my God. Ugh.
Okay, I'm going to let you have the word. I know that you're up.
No, I don't want the last word. We can listen. I'm on a regular basis. Now, listen. You and I did not agree. My own.
Sadly, 3 years later, that's not really the case, is it? Darth's been pulled away from us for a little bit. He'll be back.
Only complaint is that you tended to segue down very close related issues rather than staying focused on the issue at hand. Okay. What I do appreciate about you, I think you're very intelligent. I think
he did stay remarkable. Like he stayed more focused on your goofiness than almost anyone else that I've ever really talked to or ever heard, talk to Darth Dawkins. I think it's interesting that he still thinks that, oh yeah, you still went down these rabbit trails. Really, the guy that was following along with you step by step and paraphrasing your points to make sure that he wasn't getting things wrong in a step-by-step manner, like what the hell? Like I don't know what you have to do to this guy to actually achieve the award for not getting distracted and running down a rabbit trail. Like, does he think everyone has ADHD except him? This is remarkable.
You're a fun guy to talk and debate with, and you were entirely your disposition and your demeanor was excellent. We don't run into atheists who are not obnoxious, obstructionistic scumbags. So I can speak for the other believers in here that even though we may be frustrated with some of your responses, it was thoroughly enjoyable.
Well, thank you, and I apologize for not paying attention to the commentary. Right, I wasn't paying attention to any of those.
And you know what? I'm going to bed, but there are other guys in here who are still going to be awake who can continue.
Oh, sure, I can stick around a little bit longer. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have to get to bed.
You know? Well, thank you. I agree. I think that we disagree on a couple of things, but thank you for spending your time with me. I appreciate it.
And when we meet up again, I would like to hear more of your views about Krauser's book, where you disagree with specifically. On the myth of religious neutrality.
Sure.
Because I haven't encountered any atheists who are either acquainted, let alone read that book, and I would love to hear what you have to say.
Okay.
All right, I gotta go. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, well, that's it for that. So yeah, long overdue. I was going to review that one a long time ago, so I'm glad I got to it tonight. I am going to post, just in case anybody wants to drop in, I'll post the StreamYard link for it for a little bit. Probably not going to keep this on for too much longer, but just in case. Mostly for Real JohnWick if he wants to come in and talk. If you don't want to come on live, I totally get that. You don't have to. But if you want to, you're kind of the central focus of this one. But yeah, I thought this was a good example of one of those conversations where that Darth likes to talk about. Like, you guys are always fixating on the conversations where I'm being mean or I'm being a jerk or I'm screaming at somebody. What about all the conversations where I'm not doing that? Well, this is one where he had glowing things to say about JohnWick. Other than that whole religious that little passive aggressive Bible venom thing. That's what I call that. They spit out thing like, well, I know you from your works. You're of the evil one, all that kind of shit. So that's just me probably a little fixated because I remember that shit from churches and. But yeah, let me get rid of that. Let me bring in. Yeah, he's here. Hello, John Wick.
Hello, hi. I'm a big fan.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. I think everybody's a big fan of you thanks to this video. So and probably has been for a while because, like I said, this has been around for a while. So
Well, as a very quick follow-up, the next time I ran into him was on a different Discord server where he had, kick and mute stuff. And he muted me and kicked me before I could say a word. He was like, "Oh, it's John Wick. He's a troll," and he just got rid of me fast.
the very next time.
The very next time.
And how long was it in between encounters?
Oh, it was. I don't go on Discord very often because I don't hate myself.
Right.
But it was probably a month.
About a month.
And I know that Tom Rabbit's video went up, and people were commenting about how because my whole tactic for the whole thing, whenever I talk to apologists of whatever stripe, I try to be as charitable as possible, and I try to be as polite as possible, especially when they have the ability to kick or mute me. And I just think it's what you should do anyway when you disagree with somebody, is go, okay, well, we disagree. Let's find out where we disagree, and maybe we don't disagree as much as we think we do. And that comes from actually being in debate in college, in philosophy, things. So, but yeah, it was real quick. I was like, "Hi, Darth," and he was like, "Oh, it's John Wick," and he just got rid of me fast.
Probably because of the and this is in no way trying to besmirch Tom Rabbit, but because of that video, that's probably why you're connected with Tom Rabbit. Therefore, guilty by association. Darth really can't resist fallacies. So
no, you really can't. And I'm sorry, and part of it is that, like, Tom Rabbit, or not Tom Rabbit, Darth and a few of the other people. I am no psychologist. I'm not a trained in any way, shape, or form. But my uneducated opinion is that a lot of them have at least some very serious psychological issues. And I have serious psychological issues. So, there it is. I'm very open about my depression. I'm very, very open about my ADHD and things like that. It's just a medical condition that I have. But listening to them talk and having gone through training of dealing with my depression and things like that, I'm like, oh, you're doing these things. And for a lot of ways, I feel really sad that they have those kind of conditions and they're going untreated.
Yeah, and I think that's actually kind of interesting because one of the things, it comes up like, don't psychologize people and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm like, to a certain degree, obviously, somebody who's like a licensed professional obviously shouldn't do that because they're not supposed to diagnose remotely and all that. But I think, like what you're talking about, if you're an individual who's gone through some of those issues, goes through therapy, part of the therapy is being made aware of how to recognize that in yourself. That naturally makes you a little bit better about recognizing some of those. You're either recognizing the direct symptoms or you're recognizing some, like, maybe maladjusted coping mechanisms. And it's like, well, maybe, there, I don't know that there's anything really wrong in kind of saying, like, maybe you're attracted to this particular outlook because you've got something bothering you, or something a little, that's otherwise treatable, but yeah, you're coping with it with this kind of stuff. And I don't know with Darth. I mean, I think most people are kind of convinced just from what they know, like, oh, this guy's he's a narcissist or something like that. And I don't really care that that's the diagnosis. I definitely think that there's a lot of antisocial stuff going on, but I would expect that from a guy that's just that angry. Like this dude, like, and you don't have to be a shrink, or you don't even have to have been acquainted with therapy to know, like, that seems like a really angry dude, and he's just walking around with a big chip on his shoulder. So
he's very angry at the world.
Yeah,
he's very angry at the world, and he's gonna punch everybody in the face. And that even like one of the things that really,
in the name of Jesus,
one of the things that really told me oh wow, there's something really going on here, is when I was talking to him and I would be like, yeah, I agree with you, and he would continue his script because he wasn't listening to me at all.
Yeah.
He was just, I was like, yeah, I agree with you. If your God is real, then saying that you don't believe in him is like stupid. It's foolish. But you have to demonstrate that your God is real. And then he just kept going with his, as if I had disagreed with him.
Yeah.
That was what was really telling.
Yeah. And I that was, I think it's always helpful to point that part of it out, because it was later on after your encounter with them, is the sort of Shannon Q subbing in for Red's rhetoric on modern day
Yeah.
debate, and that whole thing. And with her, she was like legitimately fascinated with. It wasn't so much that she was just like pointing out like the way a lot of his questions and a lot of his statements are designed to sort of kind of like um, automatically put you on the defensive,
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, and I think it's odd because the sad thing is that most people are going to be like, well, this guy is a jerk and he's abusive and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, but he learned from a pro, which means
Yeah.
his childhood was probably a waking nightmare.
Yeah, and I feel sorry for him because of that. I
Yeah.
want him to be happier with his life, and I want him to find a place where he doesn't have to go online and yell at people. But it's also interesting because presuppositionalism, I've said this a billion times, because I first encountered it in college in 1989. I'm dating myself, but I first encountered presuppositionalism all the way back there, and the whole thing that my logic and argumentation teacher, professor, brought up when it came up in the debate, like when we were doing debate stuff, he said it, and I'm giving him credit for it. Is presuppositionalism is not an argument; it's a tactic.
Yeah.
It is not designed to answer questions. It is not designed to explore. It's designed to shut the other person up. And if you can pull presuppers off of their script, which is tricky, right? You can put them on an actual conversation where they have no way to deal with actual conversation, which is what my entire goal with that was. Just go, yeah, sure. If in your worldview, that's true. In your worldview, that's true, over and over and over again. And then because I'm saying yes so many times, when I say, hey, can I ask you a question about God? They'll go, yes. And then you're off to the races.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's kind of what guys like Pine Creek and stuff do, because they don't want to get into
Mhm.
that whole like, and looking at it from a macro perspective, it's kind of smart because they're really just sort of short circuiting something that it took me a while to realize that Darth and crew were being dishonest about in the first place, which was to set up this idea like, well, I've got a worldview that's Christianity, and you've got a worldview that's X. Your worldview's wrong and mine's right, and it's like, yeah, that doesn't work for presup. There aren't other worldviews possible, and
No.
you can tell that because the deeper you get into it, the more it's like, nope, you have to assume my God, and you have to assume this because they believe that without that ontological certainty of an existing being, you can't have any kind of epistemic certainty or reasonability or rationality. Therefore, the only one worldview is possible. That's just entailed from where they start. So I don't. The fact that there's so many of them that are kind of operating from this basic disconnect from from kind of one of the first entailments of the argument says a lot. But you really have to do a lot of work to get them away from the whole, because as soon as you try to say things like, well, I think this is wrong or I think that's right, they're just automatically going to say, well, from your perspective, you can't do that because you don't assume my God, and my God makes things right and wrong, so you're wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's the first jump. But if you get into this kind of thing like, okay, we're in your world, no one can deny this, cool. What happens to somebody with mental health issues? Do they go to
What?
heaven or hell?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a
What?
devastating question because now it's like, we're in your world, guide me through it. How does this work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't have answers for it because the worldview, the Christian worldview, is built on so many faulty pillars that basic questions, just simple questions, mean that they don't have answers because they have one book that gives all the answers, but it doesn't. And here we go. And and the thing about presuppositionalism also is that it's built on a misunderstanding of what presuppositions are. If presuppositions are, you and I are going to have an argument about whether it's better that Democrats or Republicans run the country.
Yeah.
Just it's a random thing, right? And we will have presuppositions in that argument. The presupposition, and you may know this, Jefferson. I'm just going to kind of saying this out loud.
Yeah.
And the presuppositions are things like we live in the United States, or at least I live in the United States. See, I don't even know. You may be in Canada or somewhere else, but you and I share things that we don't have to argue about, and those, when you come to an argument, are presuppositions. Presuppositionalists do not define presuppositions that way. They have this other definition for them. And when you question them about, like, okay, let's start by agreeing on a few presuppositions, they will shut that conversation down fast because they don't want to have that conversation, because one of their presuppositions is that God exists. And I don't have that presupposition. So before you and I can have an argument, we have to list the presuppositions that we agree with, and then talk about, those. But they don't want to have that conversation because that means that they're on the defensive of defending God. And so they don't want to do that.
Yeah. Yep. It's been pretty par for the course. And see, I've been actually kind of anxious to get into, there's one older video that I think I'm going to get into. Actually, I should ask you about it since you've been around a little bit longer, at least been, kind of mixing it up with guys like Darth a little longer. Are you aware of a video that popped out? I can't remember the user's name. I'll find it. I've got a bunch of people linked it to me because they wanted me to review it. Darth Dawkins versus Mike Fall, Fahl. Maybe.
Do you remember what the general gist of it was?
He so the videos from somebody else, they it sounds like they run across each other on a Discord server. Mike Fall is somebody who's into like paraconsistent logic.
Oh wow, yeah. He's presuppositionalists are going to have fun with that.
And I've watched it once. I saw it once, and then and once I started doing these reviews, a couple people asked me, like, "Hey, you ought to do this. You ought to review this one." And I've been putting it off because I was like, I don't really know much about paraconsistent logic, and I've tried to read up a little bit more on it. To kind of, now I think I'm just going to review it and just give my impressions on it, because at this point it's like I don't think I know it as well as this Mike Fall guy does. But it really does tangle Darth up. It's really interesting. Yeah. I do understand it a little bit better than I did when I first saw the video. When I first saw it, I was just kind of in awe of this guy. I'm like, I actually kind of thought it was fake. Darth was being so quiet through it. I thought something must be wrong.
Yeah. Well, once you start getting into different kinds of logic, like fuzzy logic and and things like that, you get into worldviews that don't have an accounting for logic, because they think that logic is just us putting order on a chaotic universe. So logic is just an illusion.
Yeah.
And you can get into a lot of really weird worldviews where, like, for example, one of the things I always say is that my worldview can account for uncertainty and yours can't. The presuppositional argument cannot account for uncertainty.
Yeah.
And mine can, because my presuppositions say my senses are only accurate enough for me to survive reality.
Yeah.
I can make intelligent enough choices to survive reality. And that's kind of like the cognito, right? It's kind of like I know I'm having experiences.
Yeah.
But other than that, everything else up for grabs, including logic. Could be wrong. And they don't know how to handle that. They're like, well, then your worldview is absurd and it doesn't work. I'm like, yeah, absurdity is a philosophy, and when you do an internal critique of it, it makes perfect sense. But yeah, once you get into different kinds of logic, presuppositionalism just falls apart.
Yeah. Yeah, and I am kind of interested in that. So I at this point I think I'm going to do that just because, and I appreciate guys like you showing up here to do this kind of stuff. I'm going to do that review so that if anyone's in there that does have a pretty a solid understanding of paraconsistent logic and stuff like that can kind of come in and explain it to me afterward.
Yeah, I could do that. It's been a while. I'd have to touch up, but the whole notion of being able to make it's, if I remember correctly, okay, let me double check here, because is it what I'm thinking it is a way to reason about inconsistent information without lapsing into, okay, yeah, it has a lot to do with math. It has a lot to do with uncertainty, which is, again, something that presups just can't handle.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't entirely fault him for it, because I think a lot of the person that I first heard precept from wouldn't have been inclined to get that deep into something like that, to be able to really ward it off. It's sort of like, kind of the Chinese menu approach to philosophy. You pick up a little part of an argument without understanding the overarching philosophical discipline, and then you try to weaponize that and use it in an argument or to defend, debate, to see what see how many points you can score, and then if you pick the wrong opponent, it's like they smack you hard, and you're like, back to the drawing board. Need to find a different approach.
Yeah,
I used to approach things that way. I don't really do that anymore. I don't like that.
Well, what I discovered when I graduated, and with studying philosophy, is I wish I had studied science.
Yeah,
because philosophy is the precursor to science. Science is a subdivision of philosophy, but it's much more like it works.
Yeah,
as opposed
exactly.
to most of this stuff, which is all arguing about angels and pinheads and dancing.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
I really like Matt Dillahunty's theists are going to court, arguing that God exists, and I just want them to produce the defendant.
Yeah,
just that's all I need. I don't need an argument. I don't need to talk about whether there are, whether or not there's a singular, source of all intelligibility in the universe. Just produce him. Just there he, But
trust me, you know the defendant's real, because you got wet in the rain today, and you can acknowledge that you got wet in the rain. Are you denying that you got wet in the rain? Like, yeah, it's a kind of classic.
And it's I've also had success with this tactic. Which, are you familiar with Gnosticism, with the Gnostic Christians?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the whole idea that there's actually two gods. There's the demiurge, the physical god, and the invisible god.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's great. Let's assume that the Bible is right about everything that it claims, and that, and there is a God, a creator God who created everything. How do you know you're not worshiping the demiurge?
Mm-hmm. You could be on the wrong side.
You could be on the wrong side of all of this, and you wouldn't know. Well, God tells me. Well, how do you know God's not lying? Well, God can't lie. How do you know that? God told me.
Yeah.
There we are. You
think that'd be enough to really raise some doubts, but yeah, to see so many of them just retreat into their definitions does get frustrating. I do have to wrap it up there. Thanks very much for coming on.
Hey, no problem.
And sticking around for this. I got to wrap it up because I think this headset's about to die, and if my mic goes dead, it's this laptop that I'm using is so finicky. It might burst into flames. It might play porn. It doesn't have any reason to, but who knows? For everybody that was in the chat, thank you for showing up. Thank you for your super chats and super stickers. My apologies if the super stickers are supposed to do something special. I'm still learning some of this stuff.
I can't help you with that.
Yeah, I was thinking like I click on them and like fireworks go off or something, but maybe I'm thinking like that might be more of like an Apple product kind of thing. But anyway, thank you, everybody.
Thanks for showing my video, man. Thanks.
Absolutely, yeah. This was a lot of fun. Sorry for delaying it. This kept getting pushed to the back burner, and it's like I'm kind of glad that I've had some time to go back and get into these. So, and thank you for coming on. So, good night, everybody. Thank you all again. Stay safe. Take care.